Hi, hope your GRE prep is going well. This video is a follow-up video which will go through implementing the strategies discussed in videos 1 to 4 with the intention of focusing on specific reading comprehension. We will practice the half and half strategy for reading comprehension in this video. This here is an example of a long reading comprehension passage of the same type that you can expect on the original GRE. It has 3 paragraphs and it's followed by 4 questions. At this point, I'll recommend that you pause the video and take about 5 minutes to read through this passage. Now that you have read through the passage, I'd recommend spending about a minute per question to go through these multiple choices and figure out the right answer for these 4 questions related to the reading comprehension passage. Feel free to go back to check up or reread the passage if needed. Alright, now that you have had a chance to go through a realistic GRE hard reading comprehension passage and attempt 4 very typical questions for this hard reading comprehension passage, let us now go through step by step through the RC solution framework. Strategy number 1. The first step is to mentally classify the subject matter of the passage within the first 2 sentences into one of these 15 different categories. There is a very high likelihood that every passage that you encounter on the GRE reading comprehension will fall into one of these 15 types. As per the strategy, we start reading, and what you'll find is that within the first 2 sentences, there will be some clues that will help orient you mentally into what this passage is about. For example, you can see the 2 highlighted words within the first 2 sentences of this reading comprehension passage, which, if you're paying attention, will automatically help you classify this passage. For example, the word drawings and the word stage both are giving you clues that this particular passage is most likely regarding some sort of an art, some sort of a fine arts, something to do with theater and stage. This is very critical. Another way to identify it, which is some sort of a trick, is to actually go through the questions first before you even read the actual paragraphs of the reading comprehension. A quick glance through the questions can help you get a hint of what is happening and help you orient your mind. For example, the 4th question here with a quick glance gives you quite a good sense of what a title could be or what the contents of the passage are referring to. You can see the word French theater in the first answer choice. You can also get a sense of some kind of a vaudeville satire, which you can see in answer choice E. The trick here is not to spend too much time, but just to orient yourself with a quick glance to see and get a sense of where this passage is going. So we have basically within the first two sentences in our mind, classified this passage into something that is dealing with art. Moving on to step 2. The second strategy is to stay attentive and focused. And one way to do that, especially for hard, uninteresting passages, is to keep track of continuity words and turn words. These are words that usually occur at the beginning of sentences. And by continuity words, these are words like moreover, thus, therefore, for example, which basically tend to continue the chain of thought from the previous sentence onto the next sentence. A turn word, however, is a word which will tend to turn around the idea of the previous sentence. For example, words like however, while. These are words that are flags or guideposts at the beginning of a sentence which will indicate to you in your mind that the idea that is being communicated in the next sentence is most likely going to contrast the idea of the previous sentence. And hence, you can do some mental accounting to stay attentive and focused and ensure that your chain of thought is proceeding correctly as you read through the passage. So putting this strategy to work, as you can see, you keep reading, and then you stumble upon this word however in the fourth line of the first paragraph. So as soon as you mentally note the word however, which is at the beginning of the sentence, you know that this is most likely contrasting what was said in the previous sentence. And this is very important for you to keep in mind, because this shows there is a contrast that has happened. But on the whole, in this paragraph, you'll find there are not really many turn words at the beginning of sentences, which makes this reading comprehension passage relatively easy, as opposed to a passage where there are several turn words, where you have to do a lot more mental accounting. And one way to help you with that mental accounting is the bifurcation method, which we will go through on a later slide. But for now, it's enough for you to realize that there is only one idea which seems to be contrasted in the first paragraph, and other turn words are basically missing. There are a lot more continuity words here. One continuity word which I've highlighted here is as a result, right? This is basically just telling you a cause and an action. So it is as a result of the previous sentence. It's a continuation of the thought. So that's very important for you as you're reading this passage to maintain that mental accounting. Okay, step number 3. Again, in order to stay attentive and to keep your mental accounting on track, you should make it a habit to identify what pronouns are referring to. And these are words like it, this, that, which if you do not pay attention to, you will lose focus and you will not be able to ascertain what exactly the paragraph is referring to. And you might have to go back and reread sentences. And that is a very bad habit, because you have limited amount of time. You should practice and ensure that you minimize the amount of times you go back and reread sentences. So this strategy will help you to prevent rereading, because you're able to track your chain of thought and organize all the information in its right place as you're reading through the passage. So you can see the highlighted words here, the pronouns, where you can see the yellow words, which basically are referencing ideas or subjects which were discussed in previous sentences. For example, let's go through the first word here, it's. This is on the fourth line. So when you come across this word it's, mentally you need to go back and associate it with what you read, most likely in the immediately preceding sentence. So in this particular example, only the previous year, French theatre had experienced one of the most tumultuous episodes in its venerable history. In its venerable history. So clearly, it here references to French theatre. So as you're reading, you should replace its with French theatre. So the way you should read this sentence would be, only the previous year, French theatre had experienced one of the most tumultuous episodes in French theatre's venerable history. So this way, you're keeping track of the idea, and you've just stumbled upon a very, very interesting fact. You see the word venerable. So this is a positive word. As you're reading through, you should be cognizant and be sensitive to the polarity of words. This is another strategy we'll discuss later. But venerable means respected or respectful, which is a very positive word. So by doing this, essentially, in your mind, subconsciously, what you've gathered is that the author of this passage considers French theatre to be venerable or considers it to be respectful. I won't go into more detail, but there are other such pronouns here. You can see, things like they, this, that, and it will be a good exercise for you to reread the passage, being cognizant of these pronouns and replacing the pronouns with the actual subjects they are referring to as you go through the passage. Strategy number 4. Now, this is a little more advanced strategy, and it may not be applicable to all reading comprehension passages, but there are certain passages where you have different layers, right? And because there are multiple viewpoints. For example, if the passage is reviewing a book, you can actually have 3 viewpoints. The author of the passage, the person who's reviewing the book. There is the author of the original book, which the author of the passage is reviewing. And then there might be a character in the book, which the author of the book is referring to. So you see there are 3 different layers and 3 different viewpoints. And there are certain reading comprehension passages which can really trip you up if you do not keep track of these viewpoints. Now, in this particular passage, there really isn't much of this. So in that sense, it's easy, and this particular strategy is not really applicable. But you do see instances here where the author of the passage is basically referencing other people, like Hugo, which I've highlighted here in yellow. So you need to keep track of those, right? As you can see right away, we are only at strategy number 4, and there's so much mental accounting that's going on. But that is the whole idea and intention of active reading. And unless you do all of this mentally, you will realize that at the end of the paragraph, you've spent 5 minutes reading the whole thing, and you're basically lost when you see the first question. And that's 5 minutes wasted. So definitely, it might look a little daunting to begin with, but the more you practice this framework, it will become second nature to you, which will help you panic less when you see a very difficult reading comprehension passage that you're not familiar with. All right, strategy 5. Now, this again is a strategy to pay more attention and to read more actively. And one way to do this is to focus on words that are in italics or which have quotation marks around them or question marks or any other punctuation, because these are words or phrases that are important or being flagged by the author, and most likely the testers of the GRE are actually going to refer to these words in one of the questions. So it's better to be prepared. And again, knowing and being on the lookout for these kinds of words which act as guideposts or milestones as you're reading will make you be more attentive through this whole reading comprehension. I've highlighted here a few of these special words. There are words here in italics, like the Battle of Hernani. You can also see there are colons, there are dashes, there are words in quotes, italics again, and each of these are basically ways for the author to convey the specialness of these meanings, of the meaning of these words. Right? When let's say the word serious is in quotation marks, what does it mean? It means that the word serious here is relative to something else, and it's maybe not really serious in the actual sense of the word. Right? It's serious, but it's not serious according to a dictionary definition. So knowing that will ensure that you're not naively interpreting the word serious, but rather you're understanding that there is a flavor or there is a shade to the meaning of the word serious as has been used in this particular passage. Strategy number 6, practicing your eye movement. Now, one very important thing is when you have a wall of words in front of you, it can be very painful if you're reading that word by word. What you have to train is the movement of your eye, the physical movement of your eyeball as you're reading through the comprehension passage. So, one example is the first few words of this particular passage. So the way you have to think about it is the early 1830s saw. Now, can you take a snapshot with your eyes of this entire phrase in one go, these 4 words? Now, some of us are unable to do it. We only read 2 words at a time. Maybe the perception and the span of our vision is such that we can only grasp 3 words at a time, which is totally fine. But you should be sensitized to this, and you need to be cognizant when you're practicing so as to maximize the span that your eyes can cover as you're reading through. Obviously, reading at least 3 words or capturing at least 4 words in a glance can really speed up your going through the reading comprehension passage. So this again is going to be a dedicated strategy, and I hope to post a dedicated video going through the strategy so we can work on it together. But for now, I'll stop here and just highlight that this is one way you can increase your speed at which you read these passages. Strategy 7. Tip number 7 is about identifying GRE words and synonyms and antonyms as you read. Now, as you're preparing for the GRE, the verbal section, you will be going through word lists. And after going through the word lists quite some time, you will find that you're able to identify the GRE words in reading comprehension passages. And when you do identify a word you're familiar with and which is part of a GRE word list, you should acknowledge it mentally as you're reading through the passage. And the other important things which you should mentally note are synonyms and antonyms that are used within the reading comprehension passage, because that is the style of writing, of especially academic writing, that the GRE is very fond of, where it'll use synonyms at different places within the passage and even antonyms. And this can be really, really helpful because you'll find that in the second half of the half and half strategy, when you're looking at the answer choices, there are several times the makers of the test can paraphrase the answers and potentially use synonyms or antonyms. That is a way for them to test your knowledge of synonyms and antonyms in the verbal section. It's a very sneaky way to test it, but that also could be a giveaway. If you do see synonyms and antonyms of words that were in the reading passage, there is a high likelihood that that potentially could be the right answer. It can really help you break ties if you're stuck during the process of elimination, as we will discuss in the second half of the strategy. So I'll just spot a few examples of these synonyms and antonyms. You see the word satire. This is the first highlighted word here in yellow, which occurs in the first sentence, satire. Now, satire you can think of as being a synonym of caricature, right? And you see that in the last line of the first paragraph. So you see satire and caricature, right? They are synonyms. And then you see the word farce. Again, satire, caricature, farce, they all seem to be talking about the same thing. They are synonyms and they are being repeatedly used here, right? So subconsciously, the fact that this word is being repeated 3 times in the first paragraph, it's signaling to you that, satire and caricature and farce are really, really important words or themes of this reading comprehension passage. So when you're looking at the answer solutions, if you find a solution which you're uncertain about, and you do find the word satire or some kind of a synonym of that in the answer choice, there is a high likelihood that could potentially be the right answer. So that is really important. You also see, synonyms like, deformity, vulgarity. Deformity and vulgarity are not necessarily exact synonyms, but they tend to convey the same idea, right? The author of the passage could have stopped with deformity, or he could have just used vulgarity. But the style of writing is such that you just tend to group similar words together. That's just the style of writing. So I would strongly suggest that be on the lookout for these kinds of groups of words like deformity, vulgarity. And then there are certain words like, the educated bourgeois, aristocracy, lampooned. So these are words that frequently appear in the GRE, and these words will be found on any reputed GRE word list. So you should spend some time going through the word lists, and when you're encountering these words that you recognize, the bourgeois, aristocracy, or lampooned, mentally you know what these mean, right? And even though consciously you're not making the effort, subconsciously you're able to make more sense. At least your mind is able to make a sense and connecting things as you're reading through. So when you encounter these words, your mind in the background is trying to really, really subconsciously connect it with the rest of the passage, even without your knowledge. So when you encounter these words, just make a mental note and keep reading. Strategy 8 is creation of a bifurcation tree. Now, this is a very important strategy which I found. Again, it's not applicable to all reading comprehension passages, but when it is applicable, it can surely be one of the most important tools in your arsenal or weapons in your arsenal, because this kind of a technique of a bifurcation tree can really help you organize or create a mental map to keep track of things. And you can know whether a particular reading comprehension passage will require a bifurcation tree. This particular passage does not have a lot of turn words. We saw that previously. There was only one turn word in the first paragraph. So there's really not a bifurcation tree requirement for the entire paragraph, for the entire reading comprehension passage. So knowing that there was only one turn word, you can ignore the strategy for now. I will provide examples in future videos where there are reading comprehension passages where you'll be totally lost without a bifurcation tree, and none of the other strategies will work. So be on the lookout for that video. But for now, for this particular reading comprehension strategy, you don't have to worry about the bifurcation tree. Strategy number 9. I've discussed this strategy previously, and it is to assign a positive or negative sentiment to the passage. And this is something that will naturally happen. As you're going through the words, you're going through the synonyms, antonyms, the turn words, you will get a sense of how respectful or how positive the tone of the passage is, right? The tone of the passage is basically the net sum of all the positive words and the negative words. So this is something subconsciously that's happening. And as you're going through your word lists and preparing, understanding, memorizing the meaning of new words, also try to assign a positive or a negative symbol to every word. And this is part of the verbal strategy that I've covered in one of the videos on this channel. And I strongly recommend you to go and watch that video, because every word comes with a sentiment, right? It's positive, negative, or neutral, every word. And subconsciously, again, as you're reading the words, as you're memorizing the words, learning new words, it's not enough just to understand the meaning. It's also important to understand the shade of the word. Is it very positive? Is it very negative? Or is it just neutral? And knowing that will really help you as you're going through these particular strategies. These are important for answering certain big picture questions. I don't think the 4 questions for this particular passage will involve this, but this is a strategy we can practice with another reading comprehension passage elsewhere on this channel. Okay, so we've gone through 9 different strategies which form the framework for the first half of the half and half strategy for tackling reading comprehension passages on the GRE. Now, that is only half the battle, because following these 9 steps, applying them as you're reading through the reading comprehension passage will position you in a frame of mind where you have done active reading and you're now ready to tackle the second half of the half and half strategy. Now, all said and done, the first half of the strategy doesn't really matter if you are unsuccessful in the second half of the strategy, which is to be able to answer the questions correctly. Because what ultimately matters on the GRE is whether you get a question correct or wrong. No matter how many strategies you use to read the passage, they will be futile if you cannot apply them to get the right answer for the questions. Now, this here is a relatively hard reading comprehension passage, which means that most likely you will not get all the questions correct. However, the goal here is to get as many of the questions right. Even if you can get 2 out of the 4 questions correct for a hard reading comprehension passage, that is good. So let's start discussing the second half of the strategy. There are 4 questions, and each question has 5 different choices from which you have to choose one right answer. And you can see that some of these answer choices can be pretty long. Like if you look at the first question, that paragraph has a lot of words, right? It looks like a short reading comprehension passage in itself. And that is true because you need to read through these answers in a very, very systematic fashion and have a framework to tackle through it. And that is what we are going to discuss in the second half. So let's go to the first question. There are 6 steps to answer questions on the GRE reading comprehension. And you have to follow these 6 steps very diligently. There might be 7 steps. In certain cases, there might be some sub-steps which we can discuss as we go through this framework. So let's start. Step number 1. Pay attention to the question stem. Now this is very, very important because the question stem can be very short. In this case, the question stem only has 5 words. The author focuses primarily on. Now it's very easy, in the interest of time, for you to skip the question stem and go directly to the answer choices. That is a very bad idea. And the reason is because the answer choices have been constructed in a way to confuse you. And by reading the question stem and understanding exactly what the question is answering, it can help you narrow down on the correct answer. So in this case, the most important word in the question stem is the word primarily. Because as you can imagine, the author in the passage is all over the place. He's talking about 1,000 different things, but there is a certain message that the author is focusing on primarily, and that is what we are on the lookout for. Okay, step 2. Read the answer choices bottom to top. The reason I think this is a good strategy is because what we tend to do is, it's human nature to always read from top to bottom. And when we approach the answer choices in that way, what we find is that the top answer choice might actually sound right, and you're running out of time, you're tired, you're nervous, and at this point you just want to be done with that question. So what you'll likely do is you will just pick option A and move on. And there is a possibility that the makers of the test might on purpose make the answer choice A incorrect, just so that it can be a trap for folks who are lazy and do not go through all the different answer choices. So to prevent that trap, make it a habit to always, in reading comprehension questions, go from option E to option A, from the bottom to the top. So in this case, we're going to start with option E. The impact of the fight between romantics and classicists on 19th century French theatre. Now, this is a good segue to step number 3, which is using the principle of elimination. The principle of elimination is just a way for you to organize the answer choices in your mind and to save time so that you don't forget which answer choices you have ruled out, and you can narrow down on just two answer choices which have a 50-50 chance of being right or wrong. So let's now take step 1, step 2, step 3 and work on these answer choices. The impact of the fight between Romantics and Classicists on 19th century French theatre. Well, like I said, you've already read the question stem. We need to think about what is the author's primary focus. Now, in the first paragraph, there is a mention of the Romantics and the Classicists on 19th century French theatre. There is absolutely no doubt that answer choice E is factually correct, right? And if you did not read the question stem correctly, you would most likely just go ahead and select option E. That is not a good idea. Because even though it is factually correct, it may not be the primary focus of the author, because it's only appearing in a couple of sentences in the first paragraph. So at this point, with the principle of elimination, E is factually right, but it seems too narrow. It doesn't seem to be the focus of this particular reading comprehension passage. So you might actually strike out answer E. Choice D, presenting a reasoned prognosis of the status of vaudevillists in 19th century France. Now, when you read through this, step number 4 is very important to keep in mind, which is read the complete answer choice. And the reason is because what you'll find is an answer choice is usually made of two halves. And this is very typical on the GRE. You'll have the first half and the second half. And most likely what the test makers will do as a trap is they will make the first half factually correct, but the second half will be false. So you'll have a true false. And if you only read the answer choice halfway, you read what is factually true, you might be tempted to go and select that as the right answer. So the suggestion and recommendation here is read the complete answer choice, identify the two halves of the answer choice, identify which is true and which is false. And if either of the two halves are false, you can eliminate that answer choice. This is a very powerful technique. So let's reread option D. Presenting a reasoned prognosis of the status of vaudevillists in 19th century France. Now, if you look at the first half, presenting a reasoned prognosis, it seems factually correct. You know, the author is presenting some kind of a prognosis, and you need to know what a prognosis means. It is a GRE word on the GRE word list. And to prognosticate or to provide a prognosis is some kind of a forecast, right? It's predicting something about the future. So it is a reasoned prediction of the status of vaudevillists in 19th century France. So you see, the first half, presenting a reasoned prognosis, doesn't make any sense. The second half, the status of the vaudevillists in 19th century France, is right. It is true. The author is trying to communicate to us something about the status of the vaudevillists in that point in history in the geographic location of France. So the second half of the sentence is right, but the first half does not make sense. At no point is the author trying to forecast or predict anything, because all the author is trying to do is actually look backward in time, in history. So there's nothing futuristic or nothing about a prognosis. So you can safely at this point eliminate or strike out alternative D. Choice C, discussing the difficulties faced by vaudevillists in 19th century France, which stifled their theoretical imagination. Now again, you have to use the half and half, because the first half of this answer choice could be contrasting the second half. So discussing the difficulties faced by vaudevillists in 19th century France. This seems pretty factual, it seems true, right? There are parts in the reading comprehension passage where some of the difficulties faced by these vaudevillists in the 1800s in France have been discussed. Their theoretical imagination was being stifled. So potentially, there's some stifling going on, so there were difficulties. So you can be safe to assume the first half is factually correct. But it is the second half which is, in fact, factually incorrect. Because while there were difficulties faced by the vaudevillists, it did not stifle their theoretical imagination. It did stifle potentially their political consciousness. But political consciousness is not same as theoretical imagination, and that is very clear within the paragraph as you're reading through it. So, if anything, what the reading comprehension passage says is that the imagination actually evolved to different aspects of the society, not just the politics. So, you can actually now at this point be safe to disregard option C. Option B, giving a brief overview of a form of theatre in 19th century France and its impact on contemporary culture. Well, this kind of makes sense, right? Because the author does give an overview of a form of theatre in 19th century France and its impact on the society during that period of time. Now, this is a great segue into step number 5, right? Be on the lookout for paraphrasing or generalization. So this is a favorite trick of the GRE test makers. They will try to paraphrase certain words so they don't appear directly in the answer choices. In this particular case, in option B, giving a brief overview of a form of theatre. So instead of calling the form of theatre the vaudeville theatre, they're actually calling that a form of theatre, right? Because there are different forms of theatre, right? There's romanticism, there's the classic form of theatre, there is the vaudeville form of theatre. So there are different forms of theatre, but in this particular paraphrasing, instead of calling it the vaudeville form, they're actually saying it is a form of theatre. So it is a more general paraphrasing of a specific form of the theatre, which is not incorrect, right? It's just the GRE paraphrasing it to throw you off. It's a trap, right? So there's nothing wrong in the first half of alternative B. And there's nothing wrong in the second half either, right? Its impact on contemporary culture. There are several times, there are several parts within this paragraph where the author is talking directly how it impacted the development of the culture during that time, the common man or the common woman during that time. So it is definitely an impact on contemporary culture and how people thought and how things evolved during that time. So I will say, at this point, you're pretty sure that the answer is going to be alternative B, but I do not recommend that you stop. right? Because you've gone through E to B, you've eliminated E, D, C, you think B is the right answer, but you still want to complete it. You want to go to choice A and read it completely, right? So let's read alternative A, presenting two competing forms of theater concerning satire, and now the second half, right? Evaluating historical evidence supporting them. This looks tempting, right? If you had stopped at answer B and moved on, potentially you could be in trouble because answer A does sound tempting, right? But if you really think about it, two competing forms of theater is not the primary focus of the author. So this goes back to the question stem, right? The author does talk about romantics, he does talk about classicists, and potentially he or she is alluding to competing forms of theater, but that is not the primary focus. Right? The primary focus, no doubt in our mind, is to do with the vaudeville theater, right? And if you look at the second half of this alternative, evaluating historical evidence supporting, there's really not much historical evidence that was provided to support. I agree there was some evidence provided in the first paragraph, but the whole passage was definitely not trying to provide historical evidence. You do not see any kind of a word list or a list of different evidences enumerated anywhere in the reading passage. So you can, I think, confidently strike out alternative A. So by the principle of elimination, not only have you eliminated other confusing, very close answer choices, but you have also been able to identify the right answer choice. I hope at this point you have understood the 6 key steps to go through the answer choices, and you've also realized how important it is to devote half your time to actually going through the answer choices. It's not just about active reading of the passage itself. So let's continue practicing. We can be a little faster to go through the next 3, but the basic idea is the same. So let's tackle this question. It can be inferred from the passage that. So the question stem has the word inferred. As soon as you see the word inferred, you have to be mentally prepared, because inference means that your answer choice might not be a fact lifted from the passage itself. There might be something extra which you have to infer. Yeah, inference means taking data and reaching conclusions based on the data, which may not be explicitly provided to you as part of the information. So inference questions typically for most students tends to be a little more difficult than other question types. But anyway, you can basically get all of that, as soon as you see the word inferred in the question stem. So now we start reading the answer choices bottom to top. Answer choice E, Victor Hugo conceded to the views of the classicist fogies. This is very tempting. Victor Hugo conceding to the views of the classicist fogies. But unfortunately, this is not the right answer. This is a very, very subtle trap, and you can see that here because there is the word concede, and you can see that Victor Hugo himself was forced to concede. But what did he concede, right? I don't think he conceded on his the critics, the classicists, who called romanticism the glorification of deformity and vulgarity. That definitely was not what Hugo conceded, right? What Hugo conceded, which is very clear from the sentence, is the serious theater of the comedy francois, which only the educated bourgeois and aristocracy had any real interest in. Right, so that's what Hugo uh, conceded to the classicists, right? So you have to be very, very careful, right? This is very subtle because it is a trap. You read that Hugo conceded something, and your first reaction when you when you see this question is he conceded to the views, and you're done, right? But this is a trap. It's a very wicked answer choice, but these are the traps the ETS test makers are going to throw at you to understand your attention, the nuances if you've really understood it. So I won't blame you if you go with option E, but as you saw, um, you cannot really go by your memory. At this point, you will have to go back and reread that sentence, or at least a couple of sentences which refer to Hugo. Okay, moving on to D. All sections of 19th century French society found the serious theatre of the Comédie Francoise interesting. No, so you saw that that not all sections found it serious. There were definitely some sections which found it serious, but the test makers here are just overgeneralizing it, right? And that is another trap. The word all sections. That is a trap because definitely it was not all sections. There was a section of the society which appreciated it, right? Um, the educated bourgeois and the aristocracy. This section of the society really liked it, but the petit bourgeois office clerk or shop assistant, right, who were not the aristocracy or the high class society, these were the people who had no particular interest. So, the trap here is the word all, right? So you have to be careful. Again, they are overgeneralizing, which they can do just to, throw you off guard. Uh, let's go to option number C. The literary talents of vaudevillists enabled them to play a leading role in the modern spectacular culture. The modern spectacular culture. Now, this is a phrase in quotations, modern spectacular culture. And we already discussed that as you're reading through the passage, when you come across certain phrases or words which are in quotation marks, what that basically means is the meaning of that word or the phrase might not be the literal dictionary meaning of that, right? And you can see that the GRE loves using those words or phrases in the answer choices or in the questions. So when you see this, because you're already mentally prepared and you did maybe subconsciously note this while you were reading through the passage, it'll work in your favor. There are no surprises. You were expecting something like this, and lo and behold, you got it. So, alternative C, the literary talents of vaudevillists enabled them to play a leading role in the modern spectacular culture. The literary talents. Let's go back, right? Where exactly did this happen? There you go. The modern spectacular culture. The modern spectacular culture. It was this skill. So if you now refer back to the first half of the half and half strategy, you would already have replaced the word this with something which is the real subject. It was this skill. What was this skill? It rested not on their literary talents, which was rarely substantial, but on their skill in employing finely sketched satirical portraits. So it's very clear that that answer choice is misleading because it is not the literary talents of these vaudevillists. Rather, it was their skill in employing finely sketched satirical portraits. So you can basically, at this point, be pretty sure that that is not the right answer. Vaudeville's satire provocatively challenged the political arena for most of the 19th century. This is not correct, and the words used, provocatively challenged, it means that you are coming out in the open and blatantly, challenging the politicians, or the aristocracy at that time. That is not true, and it's very clear from the passage, if you read it, that it was never provocatively challenged. Potentially, it was challenged in the beginning of the 19th century, right, for a certain period. But then, after that, these guys became very, very careful. They never wanted to, extend their boundaries and potentially cause issues with the politicians. And that very clearly is mentioned in the paragraphs. So B is not correct. Answer A. Vaudeville plays were usually short, droll representations of 19th century French society, insinuating political peculiarities. Now, this is a very complicated sentence, a lot of big words, but notice there's a lot of paraphrasing going on, right? You see step number 5 here, it says be on the lookout for paraphrasing, and that's exactly what is being done here, okay? There's being use of antonyms, synonyms. For example, the vaudeville plays were usually short, droll representations. Now, I mentioned to you there were certain words like satire, caricatures, and farce. Now, another synonym for these three synonyms is droll, the word droll. And you should look it up in your word list, because droll actually means same thing like a caricature, something that is a farce or something very funny. So, the test maker is testing your ability to associate, antonyms and synonyms in this particular case. Droll is a synonym of those words. So you've already got a hint here, right? Because as you were reading the passage in the first half of the half and half strategy, you've already been on the lookout for these synonyms. So when you see the word droll, and if you have a strong vocabulary, you know that, hey, this cannot be a coincidence. You cannot have three words which were synonyms in the passage, and then another word which is a synonym to those three words in the answer choice. So this right away gives you a clue that this is the GRE answer style for the correct answer. So you're right away on the right track, droll representation. And then there's a lot more paraphrasing here, right? If you look at the second half, they talk about insinuating peculiarities, right? Again, these are synonyms, right? Insinuating is a synonym for hinting, and peculiarities is a synonym for idiosyncrasies. And both insinuating and idiosyncrasies are words on the GRE word list. So they should not come as a surprise to you. And this is a classic paraphrasing and using synonyms. So that right there is the right answer, right? This is a typical GRE style. So you don't need to worry about any of the other solutions. You know A has to be the right answer. Let's go back to the passage. So you see the word hinting. You can see it right here. They basically hint a mischievous wink and a hint. So that is the same as insinuating. And then you will also find idiosyncrasies. Which again can be a synonym for which is a peculiarity, right? So the point I'm trying to make here is if you expect the answer solutions to be same language or similar language to the exact diction or word choice used in the reading comprehension, you will be mistaken, right? That's not the right attitude, and that's why it's so important to understand that this is a half and half strategy. You have to spend enough time on reading the passage, but you also need to do your diligence when you're going through the answer choices. This again, it's not an easy question, but we have a way to do it, and let's just do it. The author references faulty towers in order to. This seems a very simple word stem, a question stem. The key word here is faulty towers. So when you see this reference, you have to go back to the passage and you need to quickly see where exactly this word was used. And it's very clear here that this word was used. It was in italics, right? So obviously when you're reading it, you would have mentally tuned in and noticed this word because it's in italics. So it's easier to find. You realize it's the last sentence of a passage, right? So it's important for you to recognize that word and then read the sentence which is immediately preceding that word to get the context of what exactly the word means. Answer choice E, convince the reader of the performative dimensions of vaudeville plays. That seems very tempting because again this performative dimensions was used in the passage itself, but you can maybe leave it. This could be an answer, but you really don't. You cannot say for sure if this is the right or wrong answer, right? Option D, debate over the role of vaudevillists in 19th century French theatre. Not really. There is really no debate going on here. If you read the previous sentence, there is no debate going on. So D doesn't seem to be the right answer. Pursue a new line of reasoning. Now, alternative C might seem tempting, because when you're ending a paragraph, sometimes one of the styles of writing is to introduce an idea, a new idea, on which you will then expound in the next paragraph. And there is no next paragraph here. You've ended there. So this can be really tempting, pursuing a new line of reasoning. But let's go back and put this word in context, right? So you go back to the previous sentence and you read it, right? So vaudevillists were mutatis mutandis, that's Latin. Don't worry about it for now. The sitcom screenwriters of their age, serving up the sort of light yet topical satire that simultaneously lampooned and affirmed the performative dimensions of social interaction, status seeking, and personal identity. Think faulty towers punctuated by brief musical interludes. So It looks like faulty towers is an example that the author is giving to prop up the previous sentence. It's an example of something the Vadvilists did, which the author is assuming the reader is able to associate with, because it is something which the reader could potentially recognize. I know that doesn't seem reasonable, because I'm pretty sure that majority of you and even me have never really heard of faulty towers before we ever read this passage. But it used to be a television show, and that's why the word sitcom was used. Sitcom stands for situational comedy. I do not expect you to really know that for the GRE, but it's enough for you to understand that the word faulty towers has been used to support a previous idea, right? Which is very clear when you read the previous sentence. So it is not a new line of reasoning. He's not pursuing a new line of reasoning. There's no debate. It is supporting, a previous idea. So answer choice B, provide a modern day example of vaudeville plays. That seems in the right spirit. It's supporting an idea, so we can leave B. And alternative A, forge a new theory of French theatre. There's definitely no forging of any new theory on the last sentence. It's no new line of reasoning. This is definitely all about the vaudeville theatre. There is no new theory about the vaudevilles. It's only facts. It's a very factual, historic description of the vaudeville school of theatre. So A does not make sense. At this point, from the principle of elimination, you're left with option B and option E, right? And you have to break the tie. And you can break the tie because, like I said, you know that in this context, the word faulty towers in the question stem was used to provide a description of something the author has already mentioned, right? It can be a little tricky because you might consider, the author is using this example to convince the reader of a very narrow performative dimension of the vaudeville plays. But to break a tie in this scenario where both look okay, it's context driven, and the more you do it, I think the more familiar you'll get with breaking ties. But I think all else equal, I will go with B as the right answer because again, there is an antonym that's gone in here. It's very subtle, and that is how you break a tie, right? And that's very typical of GRE. The word here is modern day, okay? And if you paid attention, there is a word here, a phrase here, screenwriters of their age. Their age. Their age is something which relates to the past. So the antonym of their age is modern time. It is our time, right? So that is the antonym. It's a very subtle antonym, but once you know that that's how the questions in the GRE and the answers are basically phrased, it's basically a no-brainer, right? A modern day is an antonym, so that gives you a little bit of an information that out of option B and E, the correct answer is most likely option B. The last question, this is the title. Like I said in the first half of the strategy, you potentially would have looked at this to get a sense of what is the topic, the broad topic. It's definitely not alternative A. 19th century French theatre. You already looked at this, remember? There's nothing to do with art or science. A historical overview of satire in French theatre. Option B seems to make sense. Option C, a new theory of vaudeville theatre, does not make sense. You've gone through some other questions as well, and we discussed it previously. There is nothing new being introduced here. You can eliminate A and C at this point. problems confronting vaudevillists in 19th century France. You have to pay attention to the question stem. You can see that you want to see the title which will best summarize the content of the entire passage. While I do concede that the problems confronting the vaudevillists in 19th century France makes sense, right? It is a component of the argument. It's definitely not a summary of the entire content of the whole passage. So I will exclude alternative D because it's too narrow. When you're coming with titles, they can't be too narrow. That's another tip to keep in mind. And then alternative E, vaudeville satire in 19th century France. So now that seems reasonable to me. So you're now left with alternatives B and alternatives E using the principle of elimination. So now you have a 50-50 chance. Which one do you choose? You want to select the alternative which is less restrictive in its choice of words. Okay. In the previous question, you chose the one which had the antonym, which is the style of the GRE question makers. But in this case, between option B and E, I will go with option E for the simple reason that the word choice there, the diction is a little more broad. It talks about the 19th century France as a whole, whereas option B specifically talks about satire in French theater, right? I don't think alternative B is a wrong answer, but if you think about it, the purpose of this passage and the intent of writing this passage is not just talking about satire in French theater. It's about talking about why satire came about in French theater and the broader socio-political impacts of that satire, right? Because that was the intent of the people in the vaudeville school of theater. So vaudeville satire in 19th century France is more broad. So I will go with answer choice E. Well, folks, that was a pretty long analysis, a deep dive into a framework which we call the half and half strategy of tackling reading comprehension passages. At this point, I think you have gotten a decent idea of how to apply these strategies with this example. I will strongly recommend going back and reviewing the other videos on this channel so you can ingrain the framework, understand the framework. Do review this again, reread the passage a couple of times. It won't be easy, and I think you have to put in the effort for reading comprehension, as it is arguably the most difficult part of the entire reading comprehension of the entire verbal section of the GRE. I do plan to include more such walkthroughs of reading comprehension passages. I think the more you go through this framework, the more you'll get ingrained. So thank you very much for patiently listening through everything. Please do leave some comments, like, share, and subscribe this video. And be on the lookout for more educational material on this channel. Thank you and have a great day.